there's very cute ways to undermine democracy
Yeah.
that we were masters of. But yeah, the more it happened and the more frequent it became, the more blatant it became, the quicker they were being called out on it. So I think by the end of term, they were more than happy to see the back of a few of us. Yeah.
Welcome to the Save Our Sperrins campaign, Voices from the Frontline. I'm Morella Fife, your host and a member of the Save Our Sperrins team. At the heart of this struggle are the voices of local people, farmers, families and young campaigners whose homes, work and families are rooted in this place. Their voices are joined by supporters from across the world, standing in solidarity, from professors to artists, from those offering vast expertise to those whose presence alone is an act of support. All have stood with us. In this series, we share stories of resistance, resilience, and hopes from those determined to protect these mountains, their land, their rivers, the very air they breathe, and their community. Let's get started. Hello everyone, and welcome back. Today, I'm chatting with someone who's been right at the heart of this campaign, Emmet McAleer. Many of you will remember the shock back in 2019 when Emmet, a young local man from just outside Greencastle, won a council seat on a single issue, standing against the goldmine. He pulled off what few thought possible, unseating one of the sitting councillors in an area long dominated by the big parties. It was a clear message from the people. Enough is enough. We want someone who will actually fight for us. Emmet did a brilliant job during his term, speaking up when it mattered and being a real thorn in the side of the establishment. But, as we'll hear, by the next election in 2023, the main parties had closed ranks and pushed independents like him out. Since then, he's been continuing his work in education at Southwest College in Omagh, alongside family life with Tanya and their 2 children. Today, we're going to talk about what it means for campaign groups to step into politics, the lessons learned from those roller coaster years, and why engaging politically at every level matters so much if we're going to protect our communities. Emmet, it's brilliant to have you here with us today. You've been such a central figure in this story, from local lad rooted in Greencastle to council chamber, and now in your role at Southwest College. Thanks a million for joining me in this conversation. So to start off, just so listeners get a picture of where you are now, who are you today and what does life look like for you between family and your work at Southwest College?
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me. Having listened to some of the previous episodes, it's fine company I'm in, so thank you for having me. My name's Emmet McAleer. I'm now in my early 40s, father of 2 young children and husband to Tanya. And yeah, we're living in Cregan, just up the road from Greencastle. We do have the 2 young children, one starting Rangahan, starting primary 1 this year, and a wee 2-year-old girl. She'll be 2 in October. So that's really my my first and foremost role as a husband and father to them. I work in Southwest College, where I have done now for about 20 years. So between that and just my work in the community and previously in the council, and through the Cregan Community Association and the football club up in Greencastle, I feel like I've good relationship and a good finger on the pulse in terms of the atmosphere and the feelings within the community. So that is obviously stuff that's ongoing. But yeah, first and foremost, father and husband to my wee family up in Cregan.
You're a busy man these days, I can see that. Can I just clarify, what is it you do in Southwest College?
So I work in management information systems, which is student record keeping, timetable and dealing with data returns to the department. So it's kind of a mixed bag, and I suppose this week and last we've been helping out with the registration days between the higher education enrolments and the further education enrolments. They're starting on Thursday of this week, so we've just had a very busy couple of weeks in terms of new recruits, people from the local community making their way either in secondary education, further education and higher education. So it's really just helping guide those young people in terms of what their next steps may be. And not just young people, I suppose we have mature learners, people, and what they're going to do in terms of furthering their education and making themselves maybe a bit more employable or pursuing subjects that are of interest to them.
So how would you say that your family life and your work in the college and in community connect back to the values that you carried into politics when you were elected?
I suppose they're all intertwined, and they all play a major role in terms of how I was brought up and the things I believe in. And I suppose it's an echo and a theme that has kind of followed me about for most of my adult life, if not all of it. And in terms of, it's something that continues, really. I suppose the easiest way to put it is an injustice to one is an injustice to all. And I think when you see something that's not right in the world, or when you encounter a bully or someone who's belittling other people or stepping on other people's rights, it's something that really grinds me. It's something that really gets to me. And I think the importance that I would have placed on political life kind of boiled down to three main things, and they were environmental rights, human rights, and workers' rights. And they were things that I really felt were, if you took care of those things, a lot of other things would fall into place. So if you prioritise the well-being of people, the well-being of workers, and the well-being of the environment, pretty much everything, if not most of the important things in life, would fall into place as a result of that. And I think it's funny in terms of my working life. People would see me as someone to come to if they have issues, whether they're within my department or other departments. They know I'll speak my mind. They know I'll speak truth to power, and that I'm not afraid to confront or liaise with or consult with whoever the relevant person may be, regardless of their rank. I do feel like I'm approachable, and I'm someone that can try my best to communicate with others in as constructive a way as possible. So it's something that kind of as you become more accustomed to doing something, and as you maybe become a wee bit more comfortable in doing it, you take that on, that role and responsibility, and you see the impact it has in other people's lives in a very real way, in a very personal way. And it's something that kind of inspires you then when you get a little victory and a little win. It's something that inspires and encourages you and helps you try and pass that on to other people, give them a wee bit more confidence, give them a wee bit more faith and belief in themselves, and that I suppose systems that maybe aren't designed to empower them can be challenged and can be used as something that ultimately does benefit them.
So when you took the leap of running for council in 2019 on the one big issue, stopping the goldmine, would you say it was those values that led you or pointed you in that direction?
Yeah, well, absolutely, and there's no doubt they played a major role in terms of that. When I was approached to become councillor, to stand for council, it was something I was interested in. Whenever I knew that people were kind of keen to have me put my name forward, I'd studied politics as my degree, and I had a great interest in politics. It was something that I always kept fairly up to date with, whether it's local, national, or international politics. Obviously, the campaign in Greencastle is one that's very close to my heart, but that kind of overarching campaign of a local community and Indigenous people struggling against corporate greed and interest and colonialism and capitalism and the patriarchy and everything else that relates to that is something that really inspired me. And obviously we have the personal element of it being in our own neighbourhood, right up beside the football field that I spent many happy hours on. It's something that really hit home. But I was happy as well that I felt my political beliefs and political viewpoints were something that could be related to that overall campaign. You know, the part of the world that we're from, things are painted as very tribal, and people are either from what they class as one section of the community or the other. Whereas the great thing about this campaign is it's something that, you know, it went across the sort of barricade, it crossed that divide, and it brought people together. And to me, that's always been something that I found really inspiring, because coming from kind of that background of being a working family and coming from a family that, you know, or my grandparents on both sides were farmers, it's something that you can relate to. And you see the struggles, you know, people from the working class have a lot more in common, regardless of their background, their religion, their political beliefs. They have a lot more in common than, I suppose, those with and those without. So it was something that inspired me, something that I thought would be a great way of kind of promoting the campaign, promoting that idea of politics. That's something that can better people, better their lives. You know, if people stood together and kind of saw the power of the collective, as opposed to, you know, was something that's really very evident now, this idea of dividing people and pitching people against each other, whether it's their religion, the colour of their skin, their background, their financial position, you know, what their working status is. This is something, people who are disabled, whatever it might be, you know, their sexual orientation, their gender identification, this is something that's really used to split people up and focus people against each other, put their energies against each other. Whereas the reality is everybody does have a common enemy, and that's the person who's punching down and trying to split all these united groups. And if people stood united and could see kind of the bigger picture, the power that the people have is amazing. And that's, you know, nothing's ever been handed to people. No great advantage has been given to the people from those in positions of power. It's only been granted when people join together and rise up and come together and use their voices as one to say, look, the things aren't good enough. And that's like going back to the abolition of slavery, to getting the vote for working class people, for women, whatever it might be. That's how you inspire change, and that's how you make real positive benefits to people's lives. And I think that kind of bigger picture was definitely something that encouraged me and inspired me during my run as councillor and then my time as councillor.
Yeah, we've seen the rise of identity politics not only across Ireland but across the world, and it is completely thrashing our communities, disabling us, coming together to in relation to a concern or different concerns, and it's really up to us to fight back on that and say, like, here's our common concerns, let's work through that. And like you say, it doesn't matter what colour skin, doesn't matter what your beliefs are, what your orientation is, it's completely irrelevant. We're all human, and those in power are using these identity politics to split us in all directions. And
yeah, like this idea
of
the politics of fear, and it's something I suppose I personally became really hyper in tune with at the time of the independence referendum in Scotland. But it's something then that played out with the election of Donald Trump and the Boris Johnson palaver, the media attacks on Jeremy Corbyn, all like this all snowballed from that. But that's, I suppose, when I became aware of it. I think like there was in recent times there was what seemed like a political aspiration or inspiration around the time of the initial election of Barack Obama in the US, and people at the time, I remember that, like I remember sitting up and watching that and thinking this was something that was historic and something that was going to change the system. But the reality is that he came in and was worse than what had gone before him, if you can believe that. And it's kind of snowballed from that. But the idea that the media will play into this, they'll pit people against each other again, causing that division where there necessarily isn't any. And you focus on, you know, your neighbour who's got a bigger TV than you, or who's, you know, supposedly claiming some benefit that they're not entitled to. And again, like language around this, I find really interesting. Someone who studied English literature and English language, the identity or the use of language, and you talk about benefits where it went from social security and that idea of the state providing for those who weren't able to provide for themselves, whatever their circumstance might have been. Now it's benefits. It's like something that is a bonus to somebody, whereas the reality is that's far from the case. And I think, yeah, again, the media plays a massive, massive role in that, and that's kind of across the board. We've seen that in our own campaign, the impact that local media can have, whether it's running advertisements for Dalradian or whether it's ignoring key stories in terms of the campaign against extractivism and in favour of the protection of the environment. So, there's a lot of factors combined. But again, the more you dig into these things, you can see the way these powerful bodies work together and the way they've got their own interests, and that all kind of conspires to this perfect storm where it's easier for people to fall out than it is to get along. So it's trying to offer an antidote to that, I suppose, is what inspires me.
Is key, yeah. And hey, that's a conversation we could come back to again for a different podcast. And what a conversation. Everything from legacy media to social media and how it's all feeding into the one system. However, absolutely. I'm going to put that down and drag us unwillingly back towards... was there one moment that pushed you to take the leap in 2019? Was there a catalyst moment?
Personally speaking, it was the fact that I was asked by the community to do it. I think that was the thing that really sealed it with me.
Yeah,
I knew there had been murmurs prior to that of, where should we field a candidate or should somebody be put forward for whether it was the Assembly election or the Westminster election or what it might be, and the amount of votes that might be required to do that. But the fact that I was approached to do it was something, and then having spoke with my family and gotten their thoughts on it, yeah, it didn't take long to say yes.
So you kind of already sensed people had maybe hit a breaking point with the lack of action from the parties, do you think? With existing parties?
That had been evident, I think, for a number of years. And I think just the fact that there hadn't been, an election, it's a 4-year cycle. So the fact that if it had have come earlier, I've no doubt that would have been something people would have been happy to agree on at an earlier date. Excuse me. But I think it just worked out that was the timing of the kind of most realistic chance of success, and it played into people's minds. But the fact that the political parties in the area and outside the area were either seemingly working with Dalradian in a promotional capacity for their plans, they were completely uninformed. Nobody was speaking with the community, no one was liaising with the community, and no one was voicing the concerns of the community. And having been involved in Save Our Sperrins and that anti-goldmine campaign prior to the election, the fact that nobody was meeting with us, nobody was echoing our concerns, no one was voicing our concerns, nobody was educating themselves on anything of any relevance. Whenever anything was brought forward on the goldmine, it seemed to be written by the PR people of Dalradian, and there was no question from whether it was elected representatives at council level, at assembly level, or at national and international level. They were just taking for granted what this Canadian company were saying. They weren't raising the concerns of the community, and I think we just got kind of beyond fed up that we realised the only way we were going to bring this to a fore was by standing our own candidate as an independent and someone that could, as I said earlier, they're just get across those traditional barriers and those traditional boundaries. I suppose like the threat of pollution, we don't recognise those traditional barriers and boundaries, and it was a way of uniting people. And like it's undoubted there was and there is kind of a disconnect, and people are fed up of politics and that tribal politics and the inaction of Stormont, as was the case at the time. And I suppose it all played into that victory at the time.
And then the shock came on election night. You unseated an SDLP councillor right in an area where the main parties such as Sinn Féin and so on had dominated for years. That must have sent a real message about frustration to the old political setup. How did it feel at the time?
It was, it was an amazing achievement looking back on it. I think, excuse me, the fact that ultimately we were the first person elected. I was the first person elected, the first candidate elected, was really heartening and really encouraging. I think the having been in for the count and kind of not being aware of the formalities of how these things work, we found ourselves kind of sidelined by some of the party machines that were there when it came to the likes of tallying votes and stuff like that. So whilst we thought we'd performed well as a grouping, we weren't sure about what the outcome would be. And of course, then we were reading updates in the local press, interestingly provided by other parties in the area and not by ourselves or not by anyone associated with the campaign, that we'd done well, but we hadn't taken enough seats and we weren't going to get, or we hadn't taken enough votes and we weren't going to be successful to actually being the first candidate elected for the Mid Tyrone area and the area directly impacted by Dalradian's plans. It was, a sense of achievement, not personal achievement by any means, but that collective unit, the fact that we'd been out literally a month before we'd submitted our papers and decided we were going to field the candidate, it was probably, out of everybody that ran the election, it was probably the shortest turnaround in terms of actually getting feet on the ground. But it was really heartening from the beginning, the fact that people were out knocking doors, helping out where they could, handing out leaflets, going to football matches or masses or religious services and leafleting cars. And there was a real sense of community ownership, I think, of the campaign. And that's I kind of spoke about that at the time, and I still refer to it as our victory and our success, because, I played a role in it. But while my head was on the posters and stuck up on the lampposts and stuff like that, it was very much a team effort that got us across the line, that secured those votes and that were out.
So was there, pardon me for cutting across you, was there a point where you thought this is more than just a protest, but people are actually voting for change?
Yeah, very much so. I think that, I suppose, when you're in that bubble, it's very hard to kind of disassociate what you're experiencing to what's happening outside of that. But as someone that, as I said, has an interest in politics and had an interest in politics, I felt there was very much a disconnect. And I'll give you an example of one of the houses I knocked out by Fox's Park. Was a fella came and answered the door, and he took my leaflet and looked at it, and he says, "I don't care who you are, I'm voting for the independent because I couldn't trust any of the rest of them." And I said, "Well, that's all right. I'll not keep you any longer than that," and went on happily to the next house. And I thought, if every door I went to was as handy as that, we'd be doing all right. But there, very much on the ground, there was that sense of frustration, annoyance, people feeling let down because, the national question is something that is of major significance to a lot of people. But the reality is, you have to deal with issues in healthcare, which are ongoing, issues in education, issues in terms of the cost of living crisis, and all these other things that are happening day to day. And regardless of people sitting in Stormont or not sitting in Stormont, these are things that are impacting on people's life day to day. So there was definitely that buy-in on the ground, and we were obviously just hopeful that that would then translate into votes on the day.
And so then you were in. You had the seat. And you did a brilliant job, and I am witness to that, and many others like me. But of course, by 2023, the main parties had closed ranks and pushed independents out. What was it like moving from the high of victory to the reality of being squeezed out again? And was there a moment during your time in council when you could feel them starting to gang up on you because you were literally a thorn in their sides?
Well, in terms of them ganging up on me, I think there were a couple of independents in there who, whilst we may not have agreed on every little issue, we overall had kind of fairly sympathetic views to each other in terms of, anti-fracking issues with the health service, I suppose, particularly in Enniskillen and the SWA. And we could work very well and very constructively together. And in terms of even the fact that to bring a motion to council, you needed a proposer and a seconder to do that, there were a lot of times where we worked with each other in terms of doing that, bringing something that we felt was very constructive and then getting that support and ultimately pressuring the parties to side with us in terms of passing these progressive and these constructive motions. And that's something I think that we were very successful in right from the off.
Mm-hmm.
The pressures or the ganging up, I think, seemed to be from fairly early on, because I suppose Greencastle and where I'm from and the area I represent is traditionally and still to this day is viewed as a Republican stronghold, whereas Sinn Féin, the large party there and now the majority party in council, would have been viewed as untouchable by many people. When I saw they were doing something that I disagreed with, or that the people of the local area disagreed with, or something that wasn't being highlighted, I wasn't afraid or wasn't holding my tongue whenever it came to criticising them or telling them to do more, or pursuing them to follow something up with their senior party colleagues or ministers or MPs. And that went across the board. If any of the unionist parties weren't playing ball, the number of times that the SDLP sided with Dalradian, I was happy to call that out, regardless of the background of the person in question or the party in question. I had no qualms about calling people out. So I could see kind of that establishment circling the wagons fairly quickly. And that, again, that was reflected in the role of the unelected officials within the council too. Before I'd even attended my first council meeting, I had received two verbal warnings and a written warning sent out to my house, asking me to consider my position as a councillor. And this was prior to me even having a council meeting in the public domain. So I knew from the questions I was asking and the issues I was raising, and others, I have to say, behind the scenes, there was very much a sense that this council term wasn't going to be the status quo and more of the same. I remember one of the kind of initiation meetings we had when I was questioning the advice of the then chief executive, and after a bit of discussion and then a tea break, a number of the senior politicians from across the room, I have to say, came over to me and said, whenever the chief executive tells you something, you just do it. And I hang on a minute. The chief executive is not my boss. I know the chief executive is on the big money, but the chief executive is not my boss. My boss is the people who put their vote on me and the people within the area that actually I represent and across the council area that I represent. And ultimately, the chief executive does what we tell the chief executive to do.
Precisely.
We do what people tell us to do.
Yeah.
But there seemed to be this completely skewed view that because the chief executive was on £100,000+, they were the boss in the room. They directed traffic and they told people how high to jump, whereas that wasn't going to sit.
Did the chief executive invite you in for an interview early on in your career as well? Is that, am I right?
Yeah, well, I was in the office a couple of times, and then there was a mediator involved in terms of trying to repair that relationship, I suppose, that professional relationship. I never had any issues with the individual in question. I have to say that, and I said that at the time. It was what I felt was the deliberate confusion and muddying of the waters between the code of conduct for councillors and the declaration of interests. And this was something that was identified not only to myself but to Councillor O'Coffey from Enniskillen, where we were told that because we were elected on an anti-goldmine ticket, or because we were elected on an anti-fracking ticket, if a discussion arose on goldmine or if a discussion arose on fracking, we had to declare an interest and not participate in that discussion, not vote on that discussion, not voice an opinion. And we just said, look, this is insanity. This is a perversion of democracy. And the fact that we were not agreeing and not going along with what he was telling us, obviously, he wasn't the only one that felt he was in the right. But, over the course of the 4 years, and I have to say the number of complaints that were levied at me by other council members, I was never found guilty and never it proved ultimately that my interpretation was the correct interpretation. I was never penalised or cautioned on anything. So it's, it shows just that, I suppose, that level of apathy that people who are in there, particularly people who are in there for a length of time and are used to the formalities and being addressed as councillor and, fawned over and bowed down to, they want that easy life and they don't want to question anything. They're happy to go with the flow. And that's not what I was there for ultimately.
You were there during COVID at that time, so therefore many of your meetings were attended online because of the situation at the time. Was there a point when your microphone was actually switched off, or can you tell us about that?
Yeah, could you be more specific in terms of? At this stage now, I don't know how many times I was muted, and that happened when I was in the building as well. I suppose the problem was that when I was in the building, I could still shout and I could still make my voice heard to the chair. But when I was at home, they could switch off my camera or switch off the microphone or just kick me out of the meeting, which they did on a number of occasions. And again, I think there were probably chairs from every party in there, with the exception of the Alliance councillor, I must say, at the time. The one Alliance councillor was in there at the time. They've since doubled their representatives. But they all, at some stage, took offence with what I was saying, because ultimately it was a critique of their party and how their party was handling it. And I think that was the beauty of the independent model, is that you're there to represent the people of the area that have elected you. You're not ultimately answerable to people in Dublin or Belfast or London or wherever the party may be based. So whilst you may be sympathetic personally to a particular cause or a particular argument, you can be overruled by your party leadership. You can be cautioned by it. And again, party members were cautioned by their own leadership. They were deselected. There were a number of issues that the parties experienced throughout the time that I served as a councillor. And that's just a short window of 4 years. But that idea that I was ultimately responsible to the people on the ground was something that I was acutely aware of, and I thought was a key advantage of the independent campaign that the parties didn't share. But yeah, no, I have a number of times that I was evicted, and I have to give credit to the independent councillors who were serving at the time. I suppose particularly Councillor O'Coffey, Eamon Keenan, Dr. Josephine Deehan and Bernice Swift, and prior to Eamon coming in, John McCluskey, who would have all made representations for me in my absence. I think probably there was one evening, probably 3 or 4 of us got kicked out of a meeting. And this idea that because we're not part of the establishment, part of these major parties, that our vote can be silenced and effectively the voices of our communities not heard and not representative. Whilst we're laughing about it now, isn't a laughing matter. It's a really serious thing. And, there were protests outside the town hall. There were protests in Omagh about this idea of censorship. But unfortunately, it was what at the time certainly suited the bigger parties and suited I suppose, again, the unelected officials, because they could get through their agendas a bit quicker without those dissenting voices in the chamber.
It's even stronger than censorship. It's an undermining of democracy in a very subtle way. And because we're all heading online and these days, and more of these things happen online, it doesn't bode well for the future, and it needs to be addressed actually at government level. Myself, I felt outraged when I heard about it at the time. However, hold that thought there for now. I want to drag us back and return to, so in 2023, you had to leave the council and you lost your seat. What did that feel like?
Well, at the time it was disappointing. I felt very disappointed for the team behind us, for my parents, for the wider campaign group. It felt like a setback at the time. But I suppose fairly quickly, I kind of came to realise that whilst we'd lost that voice within the council, it kind of freed me up, because like every evening, more or less, I had a meeting I had something to be preparing for. I was missing out on family time. You know, I had a small son at that stage. We were expecting baby number 2 in October of that year. So it freed me up personally. But to become, again, I suppose, more actively involved in the campaign on the ground, and not to be tied by the formalities and restricted by the formalities of council life, and I suppose following that process that I'd kind of become, I suppose, accustomed to for the 4 years that I was serving in council. But to me, it seemed, and I suppose this is the way I looked at it at the time, it was very much not a reflection of the work that had been done on the ground. Not like personally, I didn't take it that, but looking at the work that other councillors had done, I suppose it was particularly minded of Donal and Enniskillen, and that he had really been at the forefront of the campaign in terms of the SWA, which was the big campaign in Fermanagh really at the time, and remains to this day. The work that he had done and how he had been at the forefront of that campaign, and he lost the seat fairly early on. I could see not just within Fermanagh and Omagh, nearly across the board, the independent candidates were suffering, because ultimately that vote in 2023 became a stormont vote. There were more posters of political leaders of the parties in my own area than there were of any of the individual candidates. There were people who had just come on the ticket at the last minute. Some names were put on the ticket at the time to try and squeeze that vote in terms of getting the maximum vote for their own party and squeezing the independent vote as much as they could, those established names, really to get us out, because they could see that we were the ones that were causing them damage. Because as the 4 years went on, I suppose it was particularly noticeable, I think initially in the Fermanagh papers, but in the latter year or two, the Omagh papers as well, the coverage that we were getting for the things that we were doing. And this went, I suppose, like there was national coverage in terms of one of the motions that I had brought about domestic abuse and violence against women and girls, that has since been revisited. It's been the subject of a BBC, I think it was Panorama, did a documentary on it. And this is something that, you know, was bigger than just the campaign we were involved in, but there were massive issues in terms of not just our local area, but wider than that. And I think the impact, and to be honest, I felt within council, the way you got the parties to act or come on side was by embarrassing them, by showing what they were failing to do and highlighting that. And it's bad to say that, but that's ultimately, you had to show them up. And like, we were particularly minded of this in a very early meeting. It was, I think, November or December 2019, where a report from NI Water came in about the standard of drinking water, and it was proposed and seconded that the report be noted. There was a Sinn Féin chair, and this was ready to be rattled through and on to the next item on the agenda. Now, the report, I think, was about maybe 120 pages long. Myself and Donal, Councillor O'Coffey, were obviously the only two councillors who had looked at the report, never mind read any of it. But there were issues in terms of water drinking quality at the Glenhorgel Reservoir, which was an issue I was raising, and in water drinking water quality in Fermanagh, which is what Donal was raising. And we said, look, this isn't good enough. There's poisons in our water, and we need follow up on this. We need assurances that our water is safe to drink, that our reservoirs are protected and are not being poisoned. And it was like the first they'd heard of it, and suddenly the whole thing was brought back for discussion, and everybody was outraged that how could we just be noting this? This is obscene that we're doing this. And NI Water were summoned to do up a new report for the Fermanagh and Omagh area, and to come down to a meeting with the council to explain their behaviour and explain how this could happen, what was being done to remedy the situation. So that I suppose the days of the easy life that councillors had prior to our entry into council were gone, because they were being shown up for the lack of work
again and again
repeatedly, and maybe coming in, staying for 10 minutes of a meeting to claim their mileage and leaving again. They knew that they were going to be called out, that they were going to be highlighted. They were sending in maybe a certain number of councillors so they could put the face on, if it comes to a vote, we'll vote with Emmet, but ultimately the vote will fail because we don't have enough of our representatives in. And, you know, there's very, as you say, kind of cute ways to undermine democracy that we were masters of. But yeah, the more it happened and the more frequent it became, the more blatant it became, the quicker they were being called out on it. So I think by the end of term, they were more than happy to see the back of a few of us. Yeah.
So it really does make a difference when campaigners step into formal politics. They can achieve stuff inside the system that you cannot always achieve outside it. On the flip side is that their power still belongs in the streets, and is there still power that belongs only to the streets and to grassroots? So campaigners stepping into formal politics like you did gives you a certain power in a certain domain. But then there's another type of power that sits with campaigners that never step into politics. And would you like to say something about that? Or?
Yeah, like you're 100% right. The real power is with the people outside, because at the end of the day, they're the people that elect the politicians, and that's regardless of you being told that your vote doesn't count or your vote doesn't matter. If you tell that to 100 people, to 1,000 people, that changes automatically, and people can lose sight or lose fact of the power that they actually hold. But I think I said earlier, the real power comes from the people, and nothing is ever handed to you for free. If you want change, you have to demand it. You have to be noisy about it. And I think, like, if we look at what's happening in Palestine and in Gaza at the minute is the perfect example of that. You had parties a year or two ago were happy to go over to Washington and shake hands with those who are funding genocide. Now they're refusing to do that because of the backlash and because of the people out on streets demanding that not be the case. And that goes like right across the board, from human rights, environmental rights, and workers' rights. You know, I stood on I don't know how many picket lines with healthcare workers and with council workers and refuse collectors, and the same ministers who are refusing to up these people's pay or have refused them pay increases are then showing up for 10 or 15 minutes on a picket line pretending they stand with these people and that they fight with them. And I think it's become people are becoming more politically aware. They're realizing that, you know, they are to a large extent being taken for fools. And they, you know, that lack of respect that comes from political officialdom to the average person is sickening. That's the word for it. That they take people so much for granted.
And it's absolutely unbelievable when you see it happening again and again and again. Holding that thought, looking back, what do you think campaign groups, whether on environmental, health or housing, whatever it might be, need to do to have real influence politically?
Well, they have to make their voices heard. And I think if you can organise and get a group of like-minded people together, that's half the battle. Like we've seen in the recent elections down south, the council elections down south, and Leitrim, you know, they're in one DEA, one electoral area, there were 2 members of the Treasure Leitrim group elected. You know, that's an absolutely outstanding achievement from, you know, I think it was a Fine Gael stronghold prior to that, and now you have, I think the majority of councillors there are actually independent. It's amazing, and they've all circled the wagons in terms of the threat being posed to the Leitrim area and Manor Hamilton from Flintbridge, the group that are in Omagh at the minute as well. You look at Donegal and, you know, the Micah and Pyrite campaigners that formed political aspirations and are now elected to government, both at a local and a national level. And things like that are inspiring and inspirational. They should serve as kind of a testament to, you know, the power of people when they become organised. And there are issues relevant and reflective of every area on this island, whatever that might be, whether it's fracking or mining or whatever it is. So
are there things you'd advise people to avoid based on what you've learned? What would you say to people not to do that?
Well, that's a good question.
That's a good question.
I think is to stay true to yourself, and if you're being advised not to do something, particularly, I would say, by the unelected officials or those who maybe don't have your best interests at heart, consult with those that you believe in, that those are around you, whether that's family or friends or your active campaign group, and work on a consensus there, because there's a lot of, again, this politics of fear, this idea of the pressures of fear. If you're warned that something could lead you into trouble, or I go back to some of the BDS motions and the boycott, divestment and sanctions motions that I would have brought to council, and the legal advice that we received, and it was so flimsy and so watery, and the public right of way that should have been declared for the Green Road in Greencastle, the lack of effort put in by the council that I felt at the time, the lack of investigation and resources that were allocated to it. There's a need there to challenge that authority, to stick by your guns, and to, I suppose, try your best not to alienate or isolate people as well. Bring people with you as best you can, not focus on the negativity. I suppose that was, again, the kind of an overarching thing of our campaign, that, we're not, this idea of language, again, when it comes to planning, we're not anti-development, we're not anti-progress. We're the people here that are encouraging sustainable development within our area. We want to protect the area, and like yourself, these relationships we have formed with Indigenous groups across the globe, this idea of 7 generational thinking, and thinking about what's going to be best, not just for you in the immediate short term, what's going to be best for your kids and grandkids and those that come after you. How can you leave this place in a better way and a better shape than you found it in? These are all, massively important things, and things that should really be key to whatever we do, whether it's me personally or whether it's local government or national government.
And finally, looking forward now, how do you see campaign groups and engaged people shaping politics in the years ahead, especially given the resistance independents often face? And what would be your dream scenario for community voices actually shaping decisions over the next 5-10 years?
Jack, if I give a good answer on this will sort all our problems.
We're all good. We're all good.
Yeah, it's the $1 million question, isn't it? Really, how do we do this? To me, there needs to be a complete overhaul of the planning system for a start. We've seen, again, in recent times, from the A5 to the mining applications, the complete shambles that our government and our governmental departments really are when it comes to something that, to my mind, should be so straightforward and should be so logical and common sense and staring people in the face. And yet they've shown incompetence, but there's no accountability at that level whatsoever. And that's been, you can go back a number of years and you'll see the same thing. You'll see it repeated, whether it's RHA or whatever it might be. There seems to be this systemic thing that we can do whatever we want, and there's no repercussions. And at the end of the day, people are going to vote us back in, and we don't have to worry about it. So I think it's people coming together and putting pressure on their politicians, whether it's forming groups or getting involved in like-minded groups, community groups, and putting pressure on these parties, because it's been very interesting, even since I've been out of council, how certain political parties have brought anti-mining motions and proposals for moratorium on mining and stuff like that I would have found myself arguing with in council, or they would have been arguing with me that what I was doing wasn't for the benefit of the community and wasn't a good thing. And now those same parties are actually proposing what I was doing in council a number of years ago. So the fact that they can see there is public support, at the end of the day, the politicians, although they treat people as fools, a lot of them are no fools themselves when it comes to being politically aware.
Final question. What gives you hope?
Just life gives me hope, I suppose. Being surrounded by my family and like-minded people, people like yourself, Marilla, groups like Save Our Sperrins, like the Cam group and the friendships and relationships we have developed with all those other bodies, like I referenced Treasure Leitrim, and these experiences that we've had going over to the European Environmental Bureau with Eddie Gallagher, now Councillor Gallagher down in Leitrim, the gathering, I suppose, based up in Derry, and all the other groups that have come together, and seeing that the strength in that movement that is growing from the early days of our own wee campaign, seeing we're not alone, and seeing those same issues amplified and reflected right across this island, right across the globe. These inspiring events that we never thought we'd see on our doorsteps, having the Sioux Indians over in Ancraigan and doing the water walk with them. All of these things are, when you look back at them, they're crazy things to think would have happened. Myself and Sinead going over to the PDAC conference and going undercover at that, and the ensuing share price crash that Dalradian experienced, which ultimately resulted in them being bought over by Orion at the time. The real impacts that all of these actions have, these coming togethers have, they're really inspiring things. The idea that I was a councillor for 4 years, I know there's plenty of my friends still find that hard to believe that actually was a real thing that happened and not something they dreamt up. There's so much to take inspiration for, and the fact that despite the length of time Dalradian have been here and the dirty tactics and tricks that they have used throughout that time, they're no further forward. They haven't done anything that they said they were going to do, and they're not going to, because the people here.
What was it they said they were going to do?
Well, they were ultimately going to walk over the welly-wearing sheep farmers on the mountainside and the bog. Yeah, the fact that they were going to have this mine camp in the hills of the Sperrins and the area of outstanding natural beauty that they never acknowledged and never realised was here. There's no mine here, and there isn't going to be a mine here. As someone said, mine your own area, don't mine ours, or don't mine mine. So yeah, it's really encouraging. It's all inspiring, and looking forward to seeing what the next event and the next coming together of our people will be.
Emmet, thanks a million for joining us today. It's been inspiring to hear your journey, the highs, the hard knocks, and the lessons. You've shown what's possible when communities take matters into their own hands, and I know a lot of people will take courage from your story. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Listening to Emmet, you can't help but feel proud of what can happen when someone decides enough is enough. I'm stepping up. His 2019 win sent shockwaves through the political landscape here, and it showed the mining companies and the powers behind them that this community isn't for sale. Even though his time in the council chamber has passed, Emmet's voice is still right here in the heart of the fight. And that's the reminder for all of us. The campaign isn't over. The gold mine hasn't gone away. The prospecting licence haven't gone away. And neither can we. So if you're listening to this and you feel that spark, do something with it. Share this episode, talk to your neighbours, show up at the meetings. Let's keep the pressure on until the Sperrins are safe for good. Thanks for listening and for standing shoulder to shoulder with us.